Yes.
No, you're good.
Go ahead.
Again, their professional services, this is that 11.5 is on top of, they do break out staff at 27.2. So again, $1,000 a month for professional services for what? It's an expensive account. And my only other thing was, again, because it's an outlier, but rent at $12 grand.
Yeah.
So $1,000 a month.
All right.
Rent, I think, is one we can actually not go. Robert, go ahead.
Yeah, I think they're going through some transition right now. They're also going through a strategic planning process. So, and we didn't talk about this directly, again, these are sort of assumptions I'm reading into when I've seen this, but having worked with them on both of these, you know, because part of this is actually just letting their staff, and so I think actually cutting back on their staff. But for example, I think they were using some consultants to help with their strategic planning process, which has been going on for about 6 months, 7 months now. And they don't actually own their own building, and that's been kind of concerning. I think they're looking at actually changing that. I was going to kind of mention too something earlier that I think when you're looking at these, and maybe it's something we want to think about for the future, as Melanie was saying, oftentimes these are part of a much bigger budget, and neighborhoods are fairly selective about what they're putting into this because they may have constraints in other parts of their budget. So when we're looking at the outliers, it's really hard in some ways to compare to other neighborhoods because it's in the context of the budget. That doesn't say what constraints they have. So it's always hard to measure exactly their larger activities. Having said that, I do have something else I can share with you. I do have this much larger spreadsheet. I went through all 990s of all the neighborhood organizations for the last 5 years. Don't ask me how many that was. Put them into a giant spreadsheet. If anybody really wants to see it, I do that.
I want to know who wants to see it.
Robin had a neighborhood requested. So.
He didn't own the building, and so that's probably mortgage payment.
I'm sure it is, because they really don't have renters, even though they have space, and they're able to keep up with it. So
they're paying a mortgage.
Any other questions about PP&A?
No, just brought to mind another potential conflict of interest example if I were a landlord, right?
No, that's interesting. I wanted to point out that PP&A put in their application that they use edemocracy.org, and I'm really excited about that since I'm a Minneapolis forum manager and I love e-democracy.
Well, in that case, we need to go back to the wedge, and I'm really excited to get a mustache ring. And I think we're going to go.
Yeah.
You can put a gun to my head and say, grow a beard and a mustache, and I'd say shoot me down because I can't.
Me neither.
It is exclusive.
All right, Prospect Park. Questions? I have one. They identify younger residents and residents of Glendale Development as underrepresented, and they give no plans, or they say we don't have any plans developed. And it's interesting when we now have gotten through 31 approved and another 14 here. Even when people aren't quite sure, they're taking guesses. They seem to know their communities pretty well, and they're coming up with some strategies they think might work. So I think it's worth asking to go back and ask them. That's not.
I was satisfied with the next one.
What they work with.
Which was their specific plans are being finalized to develop the strategic planning retreat and to reach out to those two groups.
How do we know what?
And I don't think we do at this point. To me, it's they're admitting they don't know, and we could ask them to let us know at some point.
The reason why I'm bringing this up and why I will continue to bring those up, that's fair enough, is that when we get to looking at how people do, and we don't have a good measurement of how people did, we'd have some sort of baseline to work against. I get the point, Darren, about these, but I'm still a little concerned that there's nothing, and I don't know how we get that information back in so that we know when we get done with that retreat, they say, okay, here's our plan. So is there any way that maybe we could ask them to send an update? Is there any way we could do that?
I don't think that's okay. We're in that first year of this program where people are really shifting. They're still doing the same work they always did, but they're trying to shift their answers to respond to what we're asking of them, right? And so people are kind of caught in a little development phase here, trying to figure out, okay, how can we continue to do our work, answer the questions that are being asked of us, and then report back to the commission. So I think that listing that in their proposals makes them feel that sense of responsibility. We're going to have to respond to this, that we've identified this group. But I don't think you can ask for them to have that definitively for now, because what you'll get from them is a made-up solution to this problem instead of a tested practice, right?
So I think, well, obviously, it's not about making me happy. It's about having the program worthwhile.
Well, and I agree, but I think the most important point is that this first year, we're not really well prepared to ask the right questions and set the perfect framework either. And so my concept is giving groups a lot more latitude now and having the time to think through this stuff and get to a better understanding of what we want community engagement to be and what they want community engagement.
Well, so I'm sure. I just want to say I'm satisfied with the fact that we have something in the document that says something is going to happen. All right.
They also have in their last part about how can NCEC help them. They said they would like help with project with younger members and organizing communication. So
I wanted that when I have teenagers too.
Great. Let's see. That was Seward.
Yes.
All right.
Sorry. Occupancy, 22,160 is almost half their budget. So I just like some clarification on that.
All right.
Of their, where they're located?
Pardon?
Where they're, I'm sorry, are you talking about their?
It's line item occupancy and it's 22,160 and the budget's like what, 40?
I will tell you, the thing that struck me about Seward is they are a volunteer. They're a volunteer organization. And there's so much volunteer energy in there. I'm not really as concerned about that dollar amount.
But you're talking about their office space, right?
Yeah.
They used to have a lot more support when they were with, co-located with Redesign.
Yeah.
And Redesign moved and had their own space, and so they're having to pay for more of their space than we had to before.
Do they own it?
Do they own the building there?
Yeah.
I don't think Sewer Neighborhood Group does.
Okay, I wasn't sure.
I didn't realize. Oh, that's interesting. Okay, thank you.
They're one of several organizations that are going through a lot of transition right now. So we're sort of catching a lot of bricks that are going through some difficult transitions right now. I think they're one of those, and this is one of those areas they're still catching up. I'm sorry, Jeff.
Oh, I was kind of agreeing with Commissioner Major's point that as we're fly-specking this group, it appears a lot more than the first. And so if we decide we're going to put percentage caps or recommended percentages, it's probably good because there's such diversity among all these neighborhood organizations that to look really closely at all of these line items across the board is difficult without getting into deep analysis of
Well, I think that one of the things that we have to think about too is that this goes through board approval. So the board sees this budget, and there's no board of directors that's going to say, yeah, make up whatever number you want. I mean, they're the ones who've already analyzed this and said this is in step with what we do as an organization. And so there has been 2 levels now of review of these budgets. And so what we see is very different from what a board or Robert sees when he gets it.
That brings up an excellent point, which I have asked Robert offline, and I will ask publicly because I think it's worth doing. You know what I'm going to ask. Have you verified that each one of these has, in fact, been reviewed and approved by their respective boards?
Yes, what we do is what I do is
if they know it wasn't really clear.
If they have not indicated it here, and that's part of my little spreadsheet, right? I wrote down, have they, do I have submission? Do they have the budget? Do they have the bylaws? And what was the date of board approval? Because I actually have a few organizations are very concerned about that it doesn't go to board. And so what I do is if they haven't, what I'm doing is saying to them, either let us know if it is approved or if it will be approved by the time it gets to the NCRs, by the time they get it to us. And so I want some kind of confirmation. Some neighborhoods are actually going a little further than that, actually sending me the minutes. So if you want, I could make that a requirement for all of them, but I don't know if that's necessary.
I just want to
take
know.
them in good faith when they say they've done it.
So they are all currently, everything that we've looked at and we're looking at today, you have that validation? Oh, no, it would be.
No, it might, no, there's some, if, I'm not gonna contract it until I get that verification. So I've got a couple where, for example, they haven't given me that yet, and so we've been holding up the contracts.
So we could have approved some that you do not know that the board has actually approved, or you know the board has not reviewed and approved.
In January, that was the case, yes. I think in this case.
But there's no contract.
I know, but if the board were to review and say, you know what, we don't actually agree with that, we've approved something different as a body. That's,
It comes back.
I think, so it would come back to us.
I do appreciate Commissioner Perry's point, that I guess I would prefer that we don't act on something until the board has approved it.
I think there was an implicit sort of
That was my
assumption that that was happening, and I think that was in general that was happening, but not with all of them.
Yeah, and let me take a step back to the ones in January. Pretty much all of those had confirmed. We weren't able to confirm them until after approval, but most of them had been approved. As far as I know, all of them had been approved before they got to us.
Okay.
With one exception. That was not in the mix.
Okay.
However, but I'll make sure that we actually have those dates before we bring them to NCEC.
Good.
That's okay.
Yeah, the timeline interfered with the first group. People trying to get their board meetings and minutes and all that stuff done, so.
And again, this is one of those things where we're using the experience as learnings, and we're not trying to penalize neighborhoods by any means, but if we can do a little course correction here, that's great.
But to further that point, I do think that we should recognize the point of the board's approving this would be to give us some assurances of that level of review.
Yep,
Okay.
exactly. Okay, last one is Wake Park Community Council.
Dollar amount.
It isn't the last one. I started off $1 short, and I finished up a day late.
Early.
Okay, Wake Park Community Council. I'm sorry, folks. Wake Park Community Council. Questions? Bill?
Sorry, yes.
This is Bill? No, this is what we're supposed to be doing.
The third item, they actually never answered it. What was the question? How was the relationship with the representative? They never answered it.
Right.
There's dues revenues in there of $2,700, and I'd actually like to know what does that mean.
Yep.
And then finally, they really didn't give us a budget.
I think they did.
I couldn't read it. I
So
couldn't figure it out.
I think the top half is the budget, the bottom half is just sort of FYI, knowing their budget. The dues revenue is not CPP related, that is dues from the community garden. And so this.
Sure. Okay.
Are we sure? Yes.
Okay.
I haven't been at the meeting where they approved
So-
this, but
Okay.
I do, appreciate that. I think the top half is the CPP parts, the bottom 30 is just sort of FYI for us. And that's a piece that I did verify with Wake Park.
I don't know if anybody else has questions about item number 3, but I had the same concern. It just was not addressed. And that's, to me, question 3 is, that's where I start out when I look at these submissions at the heart of the program.
Kind of what it's about.
Yeah,
I also feel like it's answers.
okay.
I still am uncomfortable with the budget they provide as far as how they did that, because talking about,
Bill, if we get a spreadsheet where Robert goes and figures out what goes in what cell, will that satisfy you?
Sure.
Okay.
So their allocation is 24,614.94.
I can do a little pushback.
And which one?
On the whole concept.
fine.
My understanding of the template was that the template was a template and not an answer
Yeah,
this.
correct.
You must answer these questions in order to, so I just want to be sort of careful about going down the road of, if a particular question is not answered, or not answered sufficiently, is that what we're using to sort of gauge the submissions? Now, the flip side of this is, granted, a key part of the program is to understand how that engagement happens. And we may want to address that with, but I just want to be, I mean, just my understanding of the template is it's there to assist neighborhoods, but not a requirement for them to use the template. In fact, last time around, we had an organization that didn't use the template. They wrote a letter.
I think
If I'm mistaken in that.
well, I think what my concern is under how groups are working to engage those who are not currently engaged or under-engaged is a very important part of this program. And whether they answered it in question 3 or question 8, I don't care. I didn't see it anywhere in the document. It's not, I'm not looking at the fact that there's a blank spot on the template. I'm looking at that information has not been addressed, just like I was with the other. And I don't think there is in this one. Doran corrected me on the other, and maybe that there was some other information. Correct. Okay. And I don't mean that in a sort of punitive way, but just bringing up the point that I had.
So going back to this group though, what question are you asking them? How are you engaging underrepresented groups? That's the exact question?
Yep.
Okay.
And you know what? My guess is they probably are. I mean, this is the first time people are putting these forms together, so my assumption is always, as I said in my note to all of you, it's probably, it just didn't get written. And so we just need some language there to describe what they're doing.
I mean, in reading it, I remember now being able to see it on the screen and read it, talking about the American Community Survey, and so it's not as if they totally didn't answer the question at all, left it blank, and said, you know, up yours NCEC.
That's not. That's.
So it gets to the point.
No one's saying. What's going on with this corner over here?
We're bad.
No one's saying.
Jeff says it's so deadpan. It's not as if they're saying,
And I don't think I've ever
don't
seen you
screw
that
yourself.
All right.
I think they could just take this and attach it to the proposal, and they would do fine. There's an incredible amount of detail in here about their outreach and the groups they seek to engage.
Every time Gary gives me the Wake Park Voice, I look forward to reading it. It's a fantastic neighborhood newsletter. It's terrific. Okay, Wyndham Park Citizens.
Can you do that attachment, please?
Wyndham Park Citizens in Action. We're running a little bit late, but this is the last one. So, any questions on this one? Oh, Bill? I should have just said, Bill, do you have any questions on this?
Actually, I will admit this is the one that I didn't get to because my computer died. And I couldn't get to it. I will admit I did not read this one.
That's okay. You can bring it up at the NCEC meeting. Like I said, this isn't the only time. There's some commissioners who are not here. Hopefully the work that we just did, actually the work that Robert's going to go do, as a result of the work that we just did, will help better inform those who are not here and allow us to get through some of the questions. But if you have more questions, it may be that when you take another look, or you read that one, Bill, you might have it, or others might go back and find some questions they have, and they can bring them up on Tuesday. All right, there's one last thing on this agenda item, number 3, which I skipped over, and I think you'll see why, but there was a question about fundraising, and I remember the decision differently. We didn't, who made the suggestion of putting the decisions at the bottom? Suggestion?
I did.
Yeah, great suggestion, because there was Robert remembered it one way, I remembered it a different way, and I just want to come back and redo it. My recollection was that fundraising was not something that we prohibited as long as it wasn't the primary activity. So if the activity was some considered community engagement activity, and as a result they were also making some money doing some things, and I think all of us who have been in neighborhood organizations see that happen frequently. And now that there's less money, maybe more frequently. We were okay with that. We just didn't want it to be the primary. We didn't want to have CPP funds used to be used primarily for fundraising purposes. It was, so that's how I remember it. Robert, do you want to give your sort of remembrance of?
The way I recall, and the way I wrote it in minutes was that my understanding was, right, that if they were doing fundraising, that was okay as long as it was related to community engagement. Then any program income that came from that fundraising activity had to be tied to the community engagement principles, the CPP principles. That was the way I put it.
Well, that makes sense.
That makes sense to me too.
Yeah.
I wanted to get on the record that I am not comfortable with Robert's interpretation and you guys, how you view it. I think it's fine for people to make money on doing community engagement, but that shouldn't be the primary purpose for that. We shouldn't be having the CPP funds used as for the primary purpose of raising funds. That said, we have approved 31, and if you look through, there are line items that say fundraising, and there's a bunch of dollars. So I think for this year, the horse is out of the barn, and I think it's a moot point. So I'm withdrawing my, I've made my concern publicly known, and I'll, that's it.
Could you give two concrete examples of what would be purposeful fundraising, would be community engagement, incidental fundraising, something like a paying breakfast, where people pay $5 to come.
Yeah.
Would that that's kind of both?
Sure. You know, one that I think would be completely fine doing is the wine tasting event that is done for a number of Southwest and some South neighborhoods. It's huge. It's there to make money, but it's a huge community building event at the same time. I wouldn't have any problem with having CPP funds used for that. Unfortunately, I can't think of an example where the primary purpose of the event is just to make money.
Yeah, because all the ones that come to mind are kind of community engagement.
Yeah. Jeff?
Yes. Well, yeah, and I appreciate your concerns, and I'm actually with you on most of it. And for example, if a neighborhood was going to use, I think Minnesota Public Radio has that for-profit entity that feeds back to the nonprofit. I couldn't see a neighborhood doing that and using CPP money to get a for-profit entity that's raising money to fund the nonprofit. Okay. However, the small community events like Shingle Creek and Lynn Bohannon did the Winterfest.
Yeah.
You know, chili cook-off.
Sure.
Hey, that's such a small-scale effort, and we are, after all, trying to encourage neighborhoods to become more self-sufficient so that as we see the city's revenue-raising capacity perhaps flat, that they have more capacity to become self-sufficient to a certain extent. So
let me seek out a hypothetical and post what I think would be something that would be egregious. Quite frankly, I don't see any of the neighborhood organizations doing it. It was it was a policy question. I just had a different interpretation. I think all that we've done is in line with the spirit of Melanie?
Well, I think, and I'm trying to remember back to the guidelines, if I saw a list of ineligible uses for CPP funds, was there?
Yep. I'm sorry. Let's see.
Yeah, there was
Of ineligible, right?
No, the eligible, I think.
What I'm talking about is ineligible.
It does not list.
Okay, so maybe what that begs the question is, you know what I mean, a listing of what you just couldn't use this for, right? Like, you can't use CPP funds as program funds, right? You can't set up a program and fund something. And so, you know, something close to what you're talking about, Matt, is you can't use this.
You mean capital investment, you couldn't use it.
Right, but you know what I mean, like, because what I don't want this ever to turn into is something subjective, like, oh, it seems like you're kind of spending your money more for fundraising than you are for community engagement. Like, we don't have any role in that subjective review of people's. spending, but if we have a list of ineligible activities, that's a better guide for people to be able to say, you know, in planning our whole budget, we wouldn't use any CPP funds for this stuff. It's restricted, and we're used to that.
Okay. Okay. Crystal?
Is there a question on the, or with the contract with the city, is anything in there about, is that subjective, is there anything in the actual contract?
No, it's pretty clear, and those are usually things about employment.
You can't sue the city with this money.
And actually with NRP, for example, I've always encouraged fundraising. Usually it's the same kind of thing. We say it just needs to be either fundraising with NRP funds, it needs to be tied to NRP. And that's kind of what I was suggesting here with this policy is if you use CPP for fundraising, then that money needs to, any income that comes back is tied to those community participation program purposes, which is kind of what I'm hearing reflected back. And I think the policy I was going to develop in short, and what I thought I heard was that if it's incidental to the activity, you know, if the intention of the event is community, is in fact community engagement, and they just put a coffee can out on the table to raise money, we're not going to say you have to report that back.
Yeah.
But if you do a fundraising activity using CPP funds, then that money that comes in from that is now subject to CPP purposes.
My only concern about creating the list that Neil was talking about is kind of like you going back to when we were creating the bylaws, we were talking about, you know, what is it that you can do that reflects badly upon the NCEC? You know, I mean, if it's not on the list, is that okay? It's like, well, no. So my concern with creating the list, well, if it's not on the list, then it is okay. Well, we're not saying that either.
So but what it does when you start to create a list, it stops us from every time we're reviewing a proposal going, maybe that shouldn't be eligible. Like, either it is or it isn't. I mean, you do have to start to create some clarity in this stuff as you go along. And you know, when we used to do NRP programs that were like, say, related to doing housing projects, things like that, we always put ineligible because people would say, oh, well, if it's money for home repairs, then you know, I'm going to get speakers for my patio, and we'd be like, you can't. You know, I mean, that, at least people have a guide that way. What I don't want to do is individual battle every time we have an application going, some of us don't think that should be eligible.
We do actually have to think about lists, the short list.
Yeah, it is that,
Incredible.
just that thing she mentioned.
Yeah.
Keep in mind.
Well, we can't stop that, right?
So I think one of the learnings that we're coming away with is that we might be, I think it would be possible to create see a list and say, this is not exhaustive, if you have questions, ask, to just knock out some of the ones, just to avoid that ambiguity that can come. And when you're trying to put together something like this, and I've done many on the business association side, I like to know, okay, I'm not going to bother because that is listed as no.
Well, like one of the things we never talked about was stipends, right? What if groups wanted to use stipends with kids and say, we want to encourage youth to participate in our processes, so here's $10 to attend a meeting. Well, we don't have anything against that, right? But I think some people might say you can't give out money, CPP money, to do that with select groups. We don't know, we've never discussed it. That's why I'm just saying that you have to talk about some of those eligible and ineligible activities as they come along. And like I said, I can't imagine meetings reviewing individual proposals and two people going, I just don't like that idea. Yeah. I mean, that makes it way too subjective.
I don't want to micromanage the neighborhood.
Right.
I don't think anybody wants.
That's my point.
Right.
All right, so last comments before we
Last
move on?
thing that I promise I'll shut up. Can we try, if at all possible, to get these banged out in Google groups and get to their meeting next week? Yeah. We're not having these too long conversations about these, so everybody's had their questions answered as best as possible.
That's one of the purposes for doing this here, and I think if we can do the Google groups and keep it in one thread instead of 8 or 10.
And could we, when we go to the actual meeting, and I did explain that I felt badly that, you know, Commissioner Perry's concerns didn't get set out, and we ended up having that vote, and we just moved on. But maybe we should just talk about how we would think would it be, you know, you approve 8, and then you talk about 3, or can we go through the 3 that have questions, and yay or nay? You know, I guess Commissioner Clark is not here, and I think he's the facilitator.
Right. Well, I think what the facilitation committee was making a recommendation is that if people, we do the same sort of thing, we have this consent agenda like we did, and if people wanted to pull an item off to discuss it, they could. That wouldn't be a voting thing like we had last time, and we could have a discussion and then decide what to do. The safety valve, so that wouldn't sort of overwhelm the meeting, was to have some of that discussion here and hopefully answer some of those questions.
Do we have any conflicts of interest on this one, dispatch?
Yeah.
Soren. Are you in Park?
I'm not on the Wyndham Park board, but I certainly want to help them. So I'll be stepping aside as facilitator to let somebody else.
Yeah.
Okay, just, I'm just saying,
That was the question I was going to ask.
So I think we follow a similar process in terms of conflict of interest. We pull those out. Those that people had questions or concerns, we pull those out and then do sort of an approval of the consent items.
That sounds good.
All right. Let's move on to the plan for the plan, a plan. Participant.
Plan for a fan?
Plan for a PAM. Okay. Plan for a process. So, as I wrote to all of you as well, I promised in a, I don't know what, some sort of delirium, I think, at the end of the meeting, to work with staff to put a draft, just so that we wouldn't have to start from scratch, and that we would model after the plan for a plan that we used for the CPP, the NIF, and the SIF. And that is what you have. Does everybody have that before them? That is what you...
Oh, that's right.
Do you have an extra copy for Bill? That is what you should have before you. If you don't, let one of us know. The purpose of this document is just to be a starting point. So people have changes. It seemed like it would be easier for us to edit. If you haven't gone back and looked at the original CPP plan for a plan, I did exactly what I said I was going to do. I took out parts that we ended up. If there was too much detail in that plan that original plan for a plan, I assumed that would go into what you'll see in this document is called a work plan. It's a part. This is just as it is called, a plan for a plan. It's an outline for how we're going to get there. So there's some background information in it. There is a set of there's sort of the development process.